Back to another live stream. I've got Steve Keen with me today. We're going to talk about my latest working paper. I basically postulated that we can replace the new Keynesian three-equation dynamic stochastic general equilibrium model with a post-Keynesian three-equation model. That's better. That's more insightful. That's causal. That's path-dependent. So stay tuned. We're going to do that. I've got my special... I got new shirts, okay? I got a bunch of new shirts for the live stream. I'm going to start wearing them on each stream. I have an engineer's brain. It's going to be fun. Stay tuned.
You are now relearning economics.
Leave it to me to butcher every live intro that I try to do on a live stream. I'm sorry. The shirt got me distracted during the intro. We're going to talk about, a couple things. Let's face it, I did the live stream. You see a little picture of Larry Summers. So I'm sure we'll talk about him. He's definitely in the news. I prayed for this guy's downfall for years. Now, I didn't want his downfall to include any victimization of people, other than, the general, people that live in an economic system dominated by neoliberal policies. But I mean, like other victimization. So I didn't want that, but I have been praying for his downfall. And so it's been satisfying, interesting. This sounds callous, but interesting to see. It's always interesting to watch the human story. And I don't want to see anybody suffer, whether they're perpetrators or victims. I don't want to see any of that in that sense. I just don't like Larry Summers' economics. I think I've made that abundantly clear through the years. So I'm sure we'll talk about that. But the main story, so I do have a working paper. And I've postulated in that paper that we can replace, for anybody that doesn't know, mainstream economics right now is dominated by New Keynesian economics. New Keynesian economics is a combination of neoclassical economics and Keynesian economics, essentially. And the big insight is they use micro foundations, real clever micro foundations in their models, right? So not only micro foundations, but they realized that, the original micro foundations didn't work out in modeling. So they added frictions. And frictions is basically, in the very easiest terms to explain, frictions add a delay to an effect you see in the system. So it's adding a lag. That's all. So, prices are sticky, right? So you add a mathematical friction without actually explaining the causation behind that. And any causal inferences from micro foundations comes down to maximizing utility. So firms will maximize profits, and households will maximize, their utility between leisure and work. And these often, it's just one agent, and the equations are solved simultaneously, backwards, essentially. And then you get a convergence to an equilibrium over a point in time. Now, I am not a big fan of that, because any system you look at, like you can have a spring, for instance, of a very simple system, and you compress that spring, right? And then you let that spring go. And let's say that spring is fixed to the ground, solid, and it pops back up, and then it oscillates up and down, oscillates until it gets to its steady state. There are systems like that, right? But then you could picture maybe something like a counterweight. What are those things? that have perpetual motion. So picture some sort of perpetual motion system, right? And it's spinning around on top of the spring and compressing it. So when the spring comes up, it pushes some other pendulum around and then lands on the spring and recompresses it, right? And it's a continuous endogenous system, right? Or just a simple double pendulum, right? I'm sure you've seen that. It exhibits chaotic behavior, right? So I see all those systems like that. So it's very hard for me to look at an economic system and say, well, this is a really applicable model um, to use because the economy doesn't go to a steady state. It never does. Not one point in the business cycle. I question, like hardened economists on this. Why do you use these models, right? And they'll say, well, they're easy to calibrate versus like complex systems like agent-based modeling or system dynamics. And I say, okay, well, what are you calibrating them to? And they're like, well, we're calibrating them to reach an equilibrium through micro foundations, maximizing utility, et cetera, et cetera. I'm like, well, what point in the business cycle does the economy hit a steady state? And they're like, well, of course it doesn't. I'm like, so then why are you building models that reach a steady state? And they're like, well, for teaching purposes. And I ask, well, why are you building models that reach a steady state or equilibrium for teaching purposes? And they're like, so we can show people how to build economic models. So it all just reverts back to their clever way of modeling, right? Not actually how the economy operates. Now, I will say, in my paper, I demonstrate with a linear model of a larger nonlinear model to explore those steady states so you can look at calibrations in that perspective. So if you're looking for stability properties in your system, analyzing steady state or equilibrium is fine. But to then take that model and say, here you go, we can use this to forecast, it never works out. I could pull up, just hundreds of data points. The last one I always make fun of is DSGE model's the best one, the Fed model, DSGE model, which is new Keynesian, just to put it out there. It's forecast on inflation through 2022. It's pretty terrible. And it always converged back to, it was funny. So at the beginning, there's a little blip in inflation. So their line goes up and converges back to their 2% maximum utility. That's the calibrated utility there. They employ a Taylor rule. I can get into that later. And it converged back to 2%. And then a quarter later, they reissued the model. Now inflation's up here and it just converges back to 2%. Then a quarter later, inflation's way up here and it just converges back to 2%, right? It's incredibly funny. The thing with converging a model back to its equilibrium is if you are in a state of crisis, you don't know which way the economy is going, right? So that's why you want to rely on those nonlinear dynamics to show instability in the system. Even if let's say your agent-based model or your system dynamic model is not like perfect. It's not Nostradamus, right? It's not necessarily to predict quantitatively dollar for dollar what's going to happen, but just qualitatively, directionally where it's going to go. And so like Doug and I with our big national model, it would performed really well in forecasting the inflation, right? It wasn't on the mark, but if it had been used by big policymakers, right, they would have seen something completely different when it came to the inflation situation back in 2022. And so I postulated these three equations. I call it 3+1 because I had an extra equation for debt because, well, that's an afterthought in new Keynesian modeling too. And if anything, they just add financial frictions. They don't actually address the actual causal inferences of it in their models, even their best models like Hank. So Hank is a heterogeneous agent new Keynesian model. And so they've decided, you're right, we can't just have one agent that's everything, right? From a micro foundation purpose. We're going to have a couple agents, but it still does the same thing, right? They're all optimizing to maximize utility, right? And that is the goal of the models. How do we get it into equilibrium, right? And if it's not really realistic when we do that, let's add some lags to it. We call them frictions. And then our model will look more realistic. So that was kind of part of the paper. But of course, there's a model underneath those 3+1 equations, right? And it's the whole causal loop model. I'm going to show that today in Ravel. We're just going to explore it. So I wanted to reduce my national model to something I could show to people, because the national model Doug and I do, it's massive. It's not really good for presentation purposes. So I've decided to reduce that model to, I think it's a 11 system state model. So there's 11, accumulations in the model, and then it interacts with each other. So I wanted to pare that down. And then I took that model and I showed you can just define macro for macro. A lot of what Steve Keen does, he's on the show today. I'll bring him in a second, right? I could reduce that into a set of 3+1 equations, right? And that could simply replace the new Keynesian three equations for the DSGE model. And so that's the purpose of the paper. I might publish it. I know Steve wants me to put it in a journal. I have a book. It might end up in the back of the book, just to flex my chops with math, because I got an engineer's brain. Let's bring on Steve. Here's Steve.
Yeah, I want a copy of that T-shirt, mate. Did you make it yourself, or you bought this one somewhere?
So I told Marie, get me some T-shirts that are really dorky, so I can wear them on the live stream.
Oh, so she went and bought some dorky T-shirts for you. Okay.
Yeah,
You got
yeah.
problem-solving function, coffee location sensor, scientific sarcasm cortex. That's it. I've got to all development there. Should I be using duct tape? Potential, IEL. Okay, so you like most engineers, you can't spell. Dislike for stupid people. Fair enough. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Clearly, I qualify.
Yeah. If you got any questions, put them in the chat. Let's see how the chat's doing. I haven't said hi to you guys yet. Let's turn it on. What's going on here, guys? Oh, hey, guys. Great to see.
Oh, look, the Tony Wilson saying, you want to sleep, read Piketty's Capital in the 21st Century. That is literally what happened to me. I was supposed to write a review of that for the, what's it called, the Real World Economics Review. This is Edward Fulbrook's journal. And I tried. And I'd read 10 pages and I'd start to fall asleep. And I'd try another time and I'd start to fall asleep. And I finally got so frustrated. I got through 400 pages. I think it was 1,000 pages long. I couldn't be bothered reading the remainder. He's actually a nice bloke. I found a nice online interaction with him and I quite liked him. But Jesus Christ, the book was boring. So I asked some of my French friends, was it a bad translation? Because at the same time, my book, Debunking Economics, has been translated into French. So is it a bad translation? And one of my French said, no, it is an excellent translation. And I said, well, why is it so fucking boring? He said, because Piketty's convinced him. Piketty is part of the French establishment, the French intellectual establishment, and they've convinced themselves that to be serious, you must be ponderous. So all the phrasing is incredibly ponderous. No reason for it in communication terms whatsoever. It's just to intimidate you that this person must be an intellectual. Jesus Christ, it was boring. So Tony, for once, we are in complete agreement.
And we're in agreement about this. That you can't just fit a curve to a complex system and expect it to run and get your linear results. I get that, but that's what economists essentially do. And essentially, I'll add this: we were talking about DSG models in the intro. That's essentially what DSG models are: is a bunch of functions, right, with fitted curves, right, and then they optimize those fitted curves to reach some sort of equilibrium. And don't get me started about how they attack expectations, right? Where they actually have to solve the model backwards. It's just so stupid, right?
But the thing is, they're convinced it's intelligent. This is one of the fun things. You make something incredibly complicated, it looks like it's science because it's so fucking hard to do. The same thing could be said for Ptolemaic astronomy. It was bloody hard to get those models of equants and epicycles and deference and so on to fit the observed movement of the planets. And that's why they were convinced they're doing science, because it's so bloody hard to do. But it can be a completely inappropriate model, and that's the case both for Ptolemaic astronomy and neoclassical economics.
Yeah, yeah. And the final argument I get from it is they say, well, we'll just use like VAR models for our forecasting
Mm.
model, which is fair. Yeah, I don't have a problem with any sort of regression analysis. If you need like a short term, 2 month or 1 quarter forecast, and the economy's in some sort of stable position, you can use that and get your numbers. And I would actually advocate just do that. But for teaching purposes, like a causal system, DSGE models are terrible. And whatever they say, so they'll say, well, our three equation models for our first year undergrads, but we actually teach something different. Once you get to your masters, we teach something completely different. They're called frictions. Um, and so that's what
I
I
mean,
say.
yeah.
I
My,
tell. Go ahead.
my thing is frictions. You're trying to describe the financial sector as a friction. It's not a friction. It's a lubricant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. I'll go
Yeah.
back to my.
It's incredibly. We have Mike here. He's got a blank screen. Let's see if I can bring him on.
Hey, it's Mike. There he is. Bring him on.
Mike.
You're not in the cave, are you, mate?
Mike.
Yeah,
Emma.
I'm here. I don't know why I'm not coming on.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah, that's incredibly.
Maybe you should turn the lights on.
Yeah, turn the lights on.
Yeah. If all else fails.
Oh, we just saw a
You
flicker
saw a
of
flash
light.
of some sort. Yeah. Yeah.
You got your cameras covered.
Ah, there we
There you
go.
go.
Hey,
Oh.
hey, that's the ugly face we love. There you
Okay,
go. Yo.
cool.
Okay, good. You're on.
Well, thanks for
Excellent.
dropping in, Mike.
Have you looked at his paper yet, mate?
Sorry, looked at what? I
Ty's
just got on
paper.
class, so I'm a little bit discombobulated here.
Yeah, we're discussing Ty's new paper, which is the three-equation post-Keynesian model as a rival for DSGE models.
Oh,
So
Have a look.
no, I haven't seen it.
I summed it up. So basically, Mike, I'm not too. I know you're not really a mainstreamer, but the big thing, in the mainstream is you start up in your first year if you're doing modeling, which is called the new Keynesian Three-Equation Model. And so it's a very basic DSGE model. I just summarized. I'm not going to go through it again for 20 minutes. Why I think it's probably not the right approach. So I took my national model and I pared that down to a smaller system dynamic model that I could show and present. So it's an 11 system state model, still, a good comparable size, but much smaller than my national model. And as I was doing that, I was trying to calibrate it and play with it, and I realized, well, I can just reduce this into three equations itself. And calibrate it. So we've talked about this in the past, Mike, that, steady state, looking at where steady states are in a system can be beneficial in calibrating your model, right? It might not be the final product, but it's a good place to kind of work in the calibration stage. So I reduced it to 3+1 equations, I'm calling it. And basically, it's just a linear model of the system dynamic model. And I just have coefficients representing the behavioral functions in the model. So you start the model, you'll see its oscillation, then it converges to a steady state. And you can see it's like a log difference from the steady state. And you can see how your system behaves. And then you can see where the steady state lands at. And then you can start working on different calibrations to see how you want your complex model to look. And it gave me a great idea. I'm like, this is the type of intro first year modeling you want to do if you're going to do modeling, because this is the type of modeling you're looking at, a causal model, right? So this is going to be applied to a causal system that shows you how a system would work. Now, whether my system dynamic model is how the economy works or not, maybe that's in the eye of the beholder. Maybe that comes down to empirical data. There's all sorts of arguments in economics. What is what is the causal nature of the macroeconomy? But all that aside, it is applied to a system, right? And so you're learning not these three equations to learn how to optimize to get to an equilibrium, i.e., maximizing utility. You're learning how to design an actual causal system that's stable. So if you want cycles, okay, you can calibrate it to have cycles, right? If that's what the system does in real life. Or maybe it does converge at some point into the future to some sort of steady state, might not be in balance in supply and demand, and so you can calibrate it that way. Or maybe the system is unstable and it takes off and it's ever increasing oscillations, right? And maybe that's what you want, right? But you learn in these 3+1 equations, I have the +1, I include debt, how to do that, and then you can apply it to a
I thought your
larger
plus
model.
one was Steve.
Well, in a lot of ways, it is.
Yeah,
a
that's
lot of
right.
ways, it is, right?
I'm his +1. Yeah, I turn up at the
Right.
party when you haven't got enough girlfriends. Yeah.
Right. So the three equation model does not include debt. And in fact, even the larger models like Hank, which is it is the pinnacle of DSG modeling right now. Because now we have 2 or 3 heterogeneous agents in their little thing. They don't. The only thing that they address debt with is it's a friction on the system, essentially a
Slows
financial
down, return
friction.
to equilibrium. Yeah, like
Yeah,
everything else.
right.
Yeah.
So anyways, I wanted to articulate, well, no, there's actual causal system there that needs to be addressed, and whether it's private debt or government debt. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. I made also made a thumbnail that had a picture of Larry Summers in it because he's in the news, but I don't know how
Oh
much we're
yeah,
talking about
yeah,
that.
he's in the news again.
Yeah.
But for all the right reasons.
We economists are more pillars of morality and
Yeah, bad morals.
So let's look. Let me bring up. Okay, I'm gonna take the chat down. Let's actually start from the larger system itself. So we'll show the condensed system after, and because I think this is the fun part, is so people understand the system itself, and so we can go through the causal loops.
So,
what are you going to say, Mike?
Just a couple of thoughts as I'm hearing this. One is Jay Forster's famous urban dynamics book generated a lot of controversy, and most people didn't understand what he was saying. The problem was Jay's books were mostly graphs and equations, some words thrown in. And so some of his students said, we should really redo, or not redo, but write a book that takes somebody from one stock and one flow. And by the end of the book, they can now read Jay's urban dynamics book. So they wrote Intro to Urban Dynamics. So, simplifying models before they get to the big one is usually a good idea. John Sturman did that with Forster's national model that generated a Kondratiev cycle, among other things, and was controversial. And so, because the economists in the US anyway said Kondratiev cycles don't exist. So John spent a summer at IIASA, the International Institute of Applied Systems Analysis, needed a project, and he suggested simplifying Jay's national model. So we went from this gigantic thing to a very small little model that was dynamically complex, even though it could fit on one screen, and turned it into a game called Stratagem. And he let people play the game. You ran the capital producing sector of the little economy. You had complete information. Your customer was the goods producing sector. And you had one and only one decision to make every period. How much plant and equipment do I need to order so I can satisfy my customer? But I have to make machines for me too. If my customer's ordering more, I don't have enough capacity. And darn near everybody who played the game, including economists who said the Kondratiev cycle didn't exist, generated a Kondratiev cycle. They had complete information. It wasn't preordained. The model didn't have to do that. And then lastly, Bob Eberlein, the driving force behind first Vensim and now Stella, really a genius guy, for his doctoral dissertation, took an engineering idea, which was how do I take like an electrical circuit and make it do the same thing, but with fewer components. So it's cheaper, right?
Mm.
And so he did that for system dynamics models, saying, how can we simplify an otherwise very complicated model, preserving important feedback loops and behavioral relationships. And that, has generated a lot of interest. So in other words, yes, good for you that going from a big research model to a simplified version to educate people, to introduce it, what have you, I think is a great idea.
Yeah, I completely agree. And actually, so I was telling Steve before we came on that I finally completed my book. And that's exactly what the approach I take in the book. As I start this model that you see on the screen, I just verbally describe it. And right now I'm actually working on little causal loop diagrams for each chapter, right? And it looks at each section and builds it up and builds it up. My idea might be that I do a version of my working paper as an appendix at the end. I don't know yet, but I completely agree with all that. Let me run the model just so people, let's just go through the model. Make sure I'm on screen. I gotta look at this screen to see if I'm gonna take your faces down, but you guys will still be able to talk. Let me try here. Hold on. Okay. So I always like to start with your capital base. You could start anywhere in the loop. And I want to show how production is done in this model just as a start, and then we can get into employment, then we can get into the financial aspects of the model. So K is your real capital stock. K has an inflow and an outflow, and this is real, right? This model has goods, and they're unified goods. And then it has a nominal aspect too that we'll get to. And so this flow accumulates by gross investment and deaccumulates by depreciation. Depreciation is it's intrinsic to K. So, as K grows, depreciation grows based on delta, which is the rate of depreciation in the model, which is 8% a year in this model. And from that, you can use a capital output accelerator, which I've got new here. I think that's pretty standard in economic models. You take K, you divide it by new, you get, you times that by your capital utilization multiplier, and you get Y, which is your output. Pretty standard stuff that Steve has shown many times. You take Y, divide it by A, which is labor productivity, get the amount of laborers you need. You take N, which is your supply of labor. Do you divide that with labor? You get your employment ratio, and then you get your first feedback loop. And this feedback loop is a reinforcing loop. So as employment goes up, the shape of this is a sigmoid. The capital utilization goes up. Steve postulated this, and I think many other people postulated before him. It's just a limiting factor, right? Obviously, you can't have capital utilization going above 1 or 100% or below 0. So the sigmoid makes sense in that situation. This is a part where I always like to highlight to new people that get into system dynamics is that you need at least one system state in a loop, or else it's basically the chicken or the egg paradox. You need information in the loop. And so when I read your paper, Steve, you didn't really flush it out. It was your PhD thesis.
Mm-hmm.
So you had this relationship in here, but I didn't see any part where you modeled this lag, which is the employment ratio lag. You may have, and maybe I missed.
No, I hadn't done. It was just in some ways, I threw my PhD together very rapidly at the end of my period of doing a PhD, because I basically wrote the model that got published in the Journal of Post-Keynesian Economics, my model of Minsky's financial instability hypothesis. I literally wrote that in about 2 hours, right at the beginning of doing my PhD, and it was a shock to get it done so quickly. So I sort of did a whole lot of other stuff, and then pulled the thesis together at the end, but didn't really integrate a lot of the ideas I had in the thesis. So you've included capacity utilization variation, for example. I built a model of that, as you know, in the PhD, but I never included that in the large model I built. Partly it's because I was using Mathematica at the time, and it's a pain in the ass to extend a mathematical model. The syntax is so complicated, and the feedback you get is so like you get feedback that a computer would understand and a human can't understand. So I found it very difficult to put the models together. I'm delighted that you're using Ravel so well to build those integrated models instead.
So what's important is in this loop is you need to have at least one stock. So if you start the loop from Y, that's a flow. L is a flow. The employment ratio is a flow, or we'll call them auxiliaries, but they behave like flow variables. And U is an auxiliary variable. There's no stocks there. So I had to include a stock. And when I include stocks, I think about real world systems. I'm like, okay, if I have to include this stock to make a loop, then this has to be a phenomenon we're seeing in the real world. And in this case, it made a lot of sense to me. Firms see an employment rate, but it's in a lagged, a delayed version. Yeah, they're not reacting to the employment ratio right away. This is a phenomenon in the macro economy. Firms collectively with a lag then react later. And they get this lagged employment ratio. That's the input to the sigmoid function that gives you your capital utilization rate. And so that's the first loop in this system. And it's what's called a reinforcing loop or a positive loop. As the employment ratio goes up, factories increase their capital utilization, which then increases Y, which then increases L, which increases the employment ratio again. And there's that reinforcing loop. So that's kind of one of the first spin-off loops to this model. And it is very sensitive in this model because the system state K is a big driver in this model, right? It is how your model grows over time. The accumulation of K means you can have a higher Y and a higher L. So from that, you look at that loop, you can follow the loop even more. So this is, what Richard Goodwin did in his model is he said that as the employment ratio goes up, there'll be it's a pressure on wages. So the way the employment ratio goes up is demand, L, increases faster than N, your supply, your labor supply. Your employment goes up, so you have a supply demand sort of relationship there. And then he postulated, now in his paper, Steve will tell you this as well, it was just a linear relationship. Mr. Blatt, I believe, Steve, is where that's where you saw the exponential relationship, and I think you flushed it out that way.
He actually used a hyperbolic function,
Okay.
and the reason he's working with his stable level of employment was 4%. Unemployment rather was 4%. So that means they got 96% level of employment, and you had to have a hyperbolic function with a limit of 100% or zero unemployment. Otherwise, you'd get the fallacy of 101% employment or minus 1% unemployment rate. So you had to have a very, very steep function there, and that's what he used. So I use the same as a minus b squared, and on your denominator. So you got a point where a equals b, you get infinity coming out of it, an infinite rate of increase in wages. And I thought that was a weakness, not a flaw in the sense that it didn't make a logical error, but it was just too steep a function. So what I changed over to was using the employment rate and using the actual total number of people with a job divided by total population, rather than people in the workforce without a job divided by the workforce. And that gives you a level of about 60%, where you can say that's roughly the point where you don't get any wage change. Something in the sort of 55% to 65% of population being employed is where wages won't change. And that meant that I could use a much smoother exponential function at that point without generating the possibility of 101% employment. So the changing over to the exponential function was my idea to generalize Blatt's work And then in a lot of the modeling I do, and this is very similar to what you're showing here, I'm trying to do it for teaching purposes. And for teaching purposes, it's easy to work with a linear set of equations and have the nonlinearity coming out of the interaction of system states. And that's what I tend to do in teaching.
Mhm. So we have an exponential function here. So it's as employment ratio goes up, lambda here is your wage change multiplier. And now you'll see there's a split off here. And I'll back out a little bit. And so this employment ratio is actually dictating two behavioral functions. One, the wage change function and how governments react to countercyclical spending. I'll get to that one in a second. We follow lambda down, and it hooks up to our second system state, which is the wage level. And the wage level is your wage rate. And so in this model, it starts at $1 a year a worker makes. And so that lambda term multiplies against the wage level. You can see kind of the little feedback loop here, and then the connection here, and that changes your wage level. So that's one of the purposes for the E subscript R term. It also controls the rate of government spending in this model. Now, because this is a teaching model, I could also use, we'll get to it, the profit ratio instead of the employment ratio and fit a function to that. I just decided, the government in aggregate, and Steve does this too, will look at the employment ratio of the economy and say, okay, it's time for counter-cyclical spending, or it's not time, et cetera, et cetera. One thing you'll notice here is I didn't use a lag variable, but government spending is a stock in itself. And so this is remembering what last year's government spending was. So as the employment ratio goes up, this is a downward sloping exponential. And so as employment goes up, this term goes down. It's multiplied against economic activity, real economic activity, and then it gives you your level of government spending. So this is this stock, it's a little counterintuitive, is dollars per year in spending. But it is a stock, so it remembers what level of government spending's happening. So some years this could go down, it could go up. Anyways, it's a little bit different than what I did up top with the lag, but they both provide first order lags to these loops here. So this one, you got your first order lag here, and then down here, your lag comes in right here. So both of those are feeding down into profits for firms. So as wages go up, your wage bill decreases profits, government spending, and in this model, all government spending is directed at firms. So they're buying goods or giving money to firms to build capital structures, whatever you want to. You could flush that out in a larger model, but in this simplistic model, it's just straightforward like that. That increases profits, right? Obviously, output in this model, I made it very simple. So in my large national model, there are a ton of lags that affect consumption. So a person might get paid, but they're not buying right away any production. In this simple model, all incomes consumed right away. And so that's your Y subscript N. That's your nominal term, increases profits. As I said, the wage bill decreases it. Interest rate payments for firms obviously decreases your profits. These are net profits. And then taxes decrease your profits. I use the P term to get the profit ratios. Again, this is something Steve's done. You can get a profit ratio in a number of different ways, but this one's pretty simple. It's saying I've got a capital base. How much money am I making from that capital base? I get a profit ratio. Now you can use that profit ratio, much like the employment ratio, and use that as an input to behavioral functions. So profit ratio in this model is the big thing that got me into Steve.
So to speak.
This was kind of him formalizing, Hyman Minsky's euphoric investment using credit and the different stages. So he's saying that as the profit ratio goes up, firms are get more euphoric over time. We'll use the word euphoric or whatever, more enthusiastic about investing in capital because they're saying, wow, we're getting the great profit ratio out of our capital base and income we're earning from it. And so we create an exponential. We take that exponential and we look at real output again, and we multiply those two together. So you've got real output, which is y, times pi, which is the investment multiplier generated by this upward sloping exponential function there, and you get real investment again, and that real investment loops back around to complete the loop that accumulates into capital. That's one of the bigger loops in this model. That loop in itself is the Goodwin model, just extended quite a bit. But the profit ratio also in this model dictates how the government taxes. So again, I could have used the employment ratio or any ratio I wanted here. But for just simplicity, I picked one thing that the government says and looks at and says, you know what, the economy is doing really well right now. Firms are doing good. We're going to tax firms based on their profit ratio. That's going to be our signal, right? So I, again, use an exponential, right? And that gives me my gamma term here, which is my multiplier to change my tax rate. My tax rate is a stock, so it remembers what the tax rate is. It can go up or down based on this function. I'll show the slopes here in a second, and that creates your tax rate. Now, what I did here is I made this model a little bit fun, and people will probably disagree with me. So my input for this function is profits for firms, but what they're taxing is the wage bill in this model, I believe. Yes. So I take the tax rate, I multiply it with the wage bill, that's taxes. I tax firms on that, but because this is an aggregate model, it's just aggregate taxing anyways, right? I could make a more elaborate model and say, well, this is taxing just the wage bill, but since people are just consuming instantly in this model, it doesn't matter. But I just did that little clever thing there for funsies. The other part, of course, is, so that completes a small loop there. Here's another example of needing a stock in a loop. Notice here, you got your profit ratio, it gives you your tax multiplier, and that you tax people, it comes back, affects your profits back in your profit. Well, you need you need a stock in that loop, some sort of memory, or else it's the chicken or the egg. What flow starts first? You can't have a cyclical model of just flows. It would be, essentially, it would just be steady state. It wouldn't do anything. I think in Minsky, it throws up an error. So anyways, you need a stock. And that just remembers the T subscript R is just a memory of what your tax rate is. So it's a rate, but modeling wise, it's something you remember, the model remembers. So you use an accumulation of it or a stock in that loop. There's another, this is now in my bigger national model, this is far more elaborate because in national data, firms never invest more than the profits in aggregate. But this makes for a good kind of micro or mesio kind of model here. And so what it's saying is that firms get so euphoric, and we discussed this, as the profit rates go higher and higher and higher, they start investing more than they actually have profits. How do you deal with that? Well, in the real world, a large, macro model, I'm going to have venture capital. I'm going to have them selling shares. I'm going to have them issuing bonds, and I'm going to have them taking out credit from banks. And in this simple model, what Steve does, in this case, we take out credit from banks. So we just simplify it and say that's what they do. So if investment is higher than profits, and of course we convert investment into nominal investment, and I'll show how that's done in a second. So now you've got investment higher than profits, you get net credit, which accumulates into another stock here. Okay, and net credit can go negative. So sometimes profits are higher than investment. That means at that point in this model, that means they'll start paying off their debt. Obviously, in a more flushed out national economy, you actually have to build a bunch of functions to make this all work. But in this model, it works. Debt, of course, accumulates. There's an interest rate to it. So a cost to holding that debt. That, of course, wraps around and completes the loop again. This is a balancing feedback loop. So as profits go up, investment goes up, you actually have one minus in here. And where is the minus term? It's somewhere in there. Oh, right here. It would be right here. So Mike will attest to this. If you want to identify loops real easily, you just look at the polarity in the loops. And if there's an odd number of negative polarities, correct me if I'm wrong here, Mike, that makes it a balancing feedback loop or a negative feedback loop. Correct,
That's right.
Mike? Yes. So in that case, our one polarity here is negative. That creates a negative feedback loop. So it actually counters the growth in the system interest rates in this model. And so that creates another loop. Now I was talking about nominal terms here. And Steve, I always, everybody knows I follow his work. He kind of uses, the Kalecki kind of equation, basically an income distribution equation to figure out the aggregate price level. And one of his models I've taken, he uses, a markup term and takes the wage share of income, adds the markup term, and that gives you your price level. I'm simplifying the equation. So I ran that simple because I want this model to be simple compared to my national model, which is really complicated and probably very contrary to a system dynamicist putting out a model that's easy to understand. So I wanted this to be simple, and I took his math, but when I ran it, I found, Steve, that it was a little bit unstable. I think you know which equation I'm talking about, but when I actually plotted it out and even tried to adjust the solver settings, I found it wasn't a smooth line going through. So I just changed it to an exponential, but it's essentially the same thing. So as your household share goes up, that causes a little bit more, it causes the change in the price level to change. And then post price level change, you get your inflation rate. So basically what it's again, another supply and demand equation. Essentially, you have your demand, which is your wage bill. You have your supply, which is nominal supply, and you get your household share of income. As your household share of income goes up faster than your nominal output, you can say that's inflationary. This function, although it doesn't explicitly say it, it implies that there's a markup in that way, and that way I get a smooth function that increases your price level. You have inflation. Banks react to inflation, so they're taking inflation and then marking up based on that inflation, so their loans don't degrade over time. And so you've got a lag function here, inflation expectations. So there's there's inflation, like that's happened, present inflation. Banks react with a lag over time. I just called that inflation expectations, and that gives you your inflation rate. In this model, very simple, the policy rate is a constant, and then there's a law that constrains it to 30% in the model. That completes that loop over there. And there are loops that you can't see. So for instance, this Y term is way up here, but I'm not going to draw a bunch of spaghetti wires back down here. So you have a big feedback loop that comes down here and feeds back around and goes back up to Y. Same with your wage bill here. It actually is defined right here. So I could add a wire and a big feedback loop there, but that just would have looked ugly. And I get obsessed with,
sexy looking diagram.
Yeah. So, but anyways, I take that price level. And so this is the difference with this model is we're defining real terms first, and then we're inflating to nominal, whereas the data, we take nominal terms and then we use deflators to find out the real. So causally, I'm doing a little bit different here. So now I've causally defined all my real terms, and now I've created an inflator out of that. I can take PL, which is the price level, multiply it against K, and then I get my nominal term for the nominal capital output. Same with investment as well. And that's the basic structure of the model. Oh, we got one other final loop here, is that productivity is variable. And again, I could have used PR, I could have used NR, because here's the thing about, like, so in system dynamics, it's very easy for a system dynamicist to really realize that the whole system is interconnected, and I can use whatever ratio I want in that system and change the curve, essentially. I just picked something intuitive. I think Steve picks this too, but I could have picked the employment ratio to dictate what the rate of change in productivity is. And so what the theory is here, and I think Steve will agree and might have mentioned this in his thesis, he says, as firms invest more, they're also investing in research and development. So as their profit ratio goes up, it's essentially the same effect as they're investing more. But in this case, I use a sigmoid again. Obviously, you can't have over 1 or below 0. So I use the sigmoid function. It says as the profit ratio goes up, firms invest more in research and development. That increases your productivity multiplier. Your productivity multiplier multiplies labor productivity, and you get the feedback loop there. This is a balancing feedback loop in the model. So as productivity actually goes up, it lowers the amount of labor demand that you need over time, and it counterbalances the system in totality. How does this model run? Well, I can do just 2 scenarios. I'll do one where there's very little. We'll do the Austrian libertarian run, as I like to call it.
I just had a good chat with Robert Murphy, so this is to be a bit of fun. Show us.
Yeah. So we'll run this model, and we'll see how it behaves over time. There is some government spending, like there is counter-cyclical spending. We're looking at the debt and deficit ratio. So black is your private sector debt, red is your public sector debt, and then the deficit, what I think is the more important thing, is your government deficit to output ratio. That's what really matters. Your accumulation of past debt doesn't mean jack shit. It's just a record, right? But what really matters is your output, your current output, and your current government utilization of that output. Is it actually interfering with the private sector? Is it filling a gap that the private sector isn't doing? So the green line's more important to me. You have your firm and household sector share of income. Steve's shown this many times before. Nothing fancy there, other than they're an inverse of each other. And then I have the financial share of income, and I decided just for funsies, I do my tax share of income as well. And as you can see, there's some instability in this model. It starts out with some high government spending, then it comes down. That creates some instability. It goes back up. And it's a very unstable model. I run it pretty much to 2070. I have some other things here. So this is, your taxing and spending. Taxes go up for a while because the economy is doing good, but then it goes down because the economy starts getting unstable. A couple phase plots, as you can see. This is not going to be this is not pretty compared to the next one I'm going to run. The behavioral functions that I was talking about. So this is the shape that they all take. That was the wage change exponential that Steve was describing. This is the top half of the sigmoid of the capital utilization function. So if you extended this flattens out. If you went back down the other way, it comes down the curve and starts to flatten out at the bottom. Exponential function for investment. This is a sigmoid as well, but it's at the bottom half. So it's flat here, rises and then goes up at the top. Downward sloping counter-cyclical spending for government. So as the employment ratio goes up, there's less multiplying effect on public spending. So that's the libertarian economy. The Austrians, Bob Murphy, he became the US president. He had his vice president, Ron Paul, and that's the economy they ran there. And they were in power until their deaths. It was pretty unstable. They had to go back and forth between policies. Things didn't work out. Now we got somebody else in power. Stephanie Kelton comes in power, and her vice president. If Warren Mosler's listening, this will piss him off. Warren Mosler is the vice president, and so they believe in strong counter-cyclical spending, and so we can run this scenario. Run this, and I like this because it actually shows that you need less government spending if you just have the appropriate programs to start with, bring stability to the economy, and actually they can get out of the way, and it's a lot more stable. But we'll see how it unfolds. As you can see, it's already the cycles are a little bit nicer. Again, this is not calibrated to any economy. This is the toy model. As I don't know if Mike was around when Steve and I were talking. The goal is my second paper is I'll calibrate this to US data. But as you can see, it actually stabilized the economy with high government spending to start with. Didn't need it anymore, right? But there is a problem with debt growing over time, so that's going to be problematic. We'll see how that plays out. We'll see. We're getting what do we call that? The intermittent route to chaos. Happening.
Yeah, the Pomo-Manaville route looks like you might have it happening. Yeah,
it's happening there. So looks like we're going to need some counter-cyclical spending over time. The model, of course, says okay, employment is going down. We're going to need to counteract that with some counter-cyclical spending to stabilize the economy, which it does. Well, notice you don't need a lot at this point, just a little bit, and it starts to stabilize it, and that's where the model ends. But you look at the phase plot, boy, those look beautiful. Just a work of art there, right? And that's just showing that it's a stable economy. This is like the whole 10 or 11 years ago when Steve was making his Minsky shirts. This was definitionally what he was trying to show, right? Anyways, so there's that. But I condense this model because, if you were to just try to calibrate this model as it is now, you change one variable in it. One, it'll do nothing if there's a lot of feedback. There's not a lot of feedback loops in this model, but enough where if you just change one parameter, the system itself is quite resilient. Nothing will happen. So you got to really start jamming up things or jamming multiple parameters in every which way. It's next to impossible to calibrate a model that way. I can bring up the simplified model. Window. And I'll make sure this is big on our screen. I'll take you guys down again, but you can still talk through it. So this is a linear version of the model. So instead of having all those terms, behavioral terms, those nonlinear shapes that you saw on the screen, I just have a bunch of coefficients, right? The intensity that they affect each term. So this is my basically my 3+1 equation. So my deviation of output, a deviation from debt, deviation from the policy rate, and deviation from inflation. And then I also had one other variable, and that was the profitability deviation, but I don't really define it as its own equation. Feeds into the y equation. And so you can look at the system that I just showed you, but you can look at to where it converges to a steady state based on your coefficient settings over time. So when it settles now to its steady state, you can see where each variable deviates from its steady state position, which is 0, and start calibrating that way. And then you have stability. So you don't have this constant nonlinear effect down the line. You can see what your model's doing and then change parameters. So if I go back and let's say I want to I don't know, lower the deviation from government spending, let's say, just for the point of exercise, and see how the model behaves. Okay, well, these actually decrease and get towards its steady state at 0, but private debt accelerates. So there's basically what I did with that coefficient is I lowered the intervention from government spending. We saw in the big model, if we do that, that just means the government or private sector debt accumulates and you get a bigger deviation away from its steady state. So this is the three-equation model that I would propose. It replaces the new Keynesian model because it is directly relevant to a whole system behind it, right? And so explore your coefficients to see, because these coefficients interact with each other. They're not independent. And see how, okay, a change in government spending, it shows that now my deviation from 0 for private sector debt is going to go through the roof. I can change that again. Let's say, I don't know, go the other way and run that again. I'm not doing any specific tests. In that case, see some other things. So profits go up, output goes up. Nothing really changed there with jamming it way up to there. Private sector debt still goes up. What's this one here? This is profitability goes down, inflation goes up. So that's how you can kind of calibrate your model. Now, if I was calibrating too, I'd actually add a few more terms into this model. But for the paper, I wanted to constrain it as a replacement. These terms basically represent the Taylor rule in the new Keynesian model. This is my +1 equation where I actually address, yes, there's private debt in the system. We need to address it. And a financial friction is not the way you address it, right? You have your output. So in the new Keynesian model, it's looking at potential output and its realized output and the gap between it. And they're trying to close that gap and optimize it, right? So everybody's optimized their behavior. You got perfect profit maximization and perfect utility between leisure and wages, and you close that gap in output. Now, for me, I know that doesn't really exist. We never get to that point. We cross that point a bunch of times, but we never settle in that point. But I could do that with these equations, right, to find the stability points of my model, so I understand why I'm seeing the nonlinear behavior. Because if I go back to the other model, if I just put a bunch of random parameter values in there, it could just get unstable. And so you'll see exponentially increasing cycles, right? And you're like, holy shit, my model's crap, doesn't represent any business cycles. What am I doing wrong? Well, that's when you got to start doing some basic calibration on your model. This is one method to do it. Although I'll tell you, AI is getting a lot better nowadays. Pretty soon it can just do it for you. But this is the way you would approach it, right? You could approach it a few other ways, but I would find some other terms in there as well, right? So I'd be looking more, I did create a term for employment and look at the deviation there, whereas I treat employment here as just a coefficient. So you could add a few more terms in here to really calibrate that model. And so in my second paper, my follow-up paper, I'm going to use this method a little more expanded and a little more detailed, and I'm going to apply the US data. So I'll use some sort of in-sample data. Let's say it's 2015 to 2019. That might be reasonable. Who knows? That's my in-sample data. And then I'll use my out-of-sample data, you know, the pandemic to now, which would be a great, robust out-of-sample data set, considering that large exogenous shock of the pandemic we saw. So that's basically what I've been doing. I'll stop sharing, come back to my main screen, put on the chat. You guys can talk.
Very cool, mate. Extremely. What do you think? You're the genuine pro in system dynamics. Mike, what do you reckon?
Genuine. And Mike, if you're going to be mean here,
Yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah, well, I just read a PhD dissertation proposal, and it's pretty much marked up on every page. And the student thought he was done. And it's like, well, we got to talk. Well, I don't use Ravel. I know I should. I tell my students about it. I just don't think the way you're modeling there. I'd use it if it enhanced my thinking or at least was neutral, but I just don't think about models that way. So I'm not entirely sure. Sometimes, I mean, I get the gist of what you're doing. Sometimes I'm a little bit in the dark about what's happening. One thing that was occurring to me is stream of consciousness is in terms of technical modeling stuff is we draw an important distinction in system dynamics between material delays and information delays and on the order of the delay. And it makes it's quite important to get that correct. And you kept mentioning lags and whatever. So I was like, it was interesting to know exactly what's happening there. So, that was one thing. What else was occurring to me? So, the deviation and calibration and all that stuff, to me, it was starting to look like you have steady state error in the model, but I could be totally wrong. I know you were looking at that for the purposes of calibration, but I had a cartoon bubble with a question mark above my head as to what was happening there in terms of sort of getting locked in with a deviation from some target or some desired value or something. And if that's the case, then we would call that steady state error in our models. And we typically try to get rid of those. So get rid of steady state error. If you're using it for some calibration purposes, then I'm not familiar with that technique. So I'm not, again, these are just what was running through my mind.
You know why, Mike? Is because I got this.
Oh, okay. Nice. I'm surrounded by engineers here at WPI. So
are they dicks like me? Because I've got hold on.
Don't get me started on oh my God. These guys, they don't know what we do. Like what we're doing here is every bit as rigorous as what they do, but they think we read poetry or something, or angels dancing on the head of a pin or something.
Yeah, they did that in Annoy Tiny. Okay.
Yeah, and then then when you show them some of what you're doing, they're like, "Oh my God, you do sort of engineering stuff? Oh my God!" It's like, yeah. I'm like, what do you think we're doing over here?
And our stuff is more. That's the thing about Minsky. It's more of a Ravel. It's more explicitly showing the engineering side of things. So differential blocks. Actually, one thing we haven't made a great deal of use of.
I actually want to address. So you're right. So I wasn't speaking in system dynamic terms. So those lags that I was describing, like for the employee, that's an informational lag, whereas the lag a first order lag created by the stock is a material delay. So I should, maybe if I was presenting to a system dynamics crowd, instead of using the term lags, I would have been like, that's an informational lag. But really, I wanted to highlight there, in any loop, you need at least one stock, or it's not a loop.
Yeah, right? or you have a simultaneous equation problem, right?
An algebraic loop, which is and Ravel, of course, reports those as an error straight away. Yeah, I mean, one thing I want to see, like, of course, I designed it, so I'm used to thinking in the flowcharts you have there. Yeah, that's a good one on you.
Is this shitting on me? I'll put it up there.
It's a dick waving experience. Yeah. The engineering focus was important to me because we needed to show the actual dynamics properly and showing them live rather than finding a snapshot of the results afterwards. The one thing I want to see that you should change in yours is just using Greek characters all the way through. And one thing I realized when I was trying to teach is that people have got to remember, what are you using nu for? Yeah, like nu was the capital output ratio. And I finally said, well, Ravel, because it supports LaTeX, you can use LaTeX formatting. So rather than using, nu for my capital output ratio now, I use K subscript Y superscript little r. and then people can look at it. Oh, that's a capital output ratio. So I think to make it more intelligible,
Oh.
that matters for your teaching model. Try to find it'd be laborious, but you can do a search and replace to do it rapidly. Change all the terms so they've got meaningful abbreviations, and I try to stick at no more than 3 characters for a parameter. But K subscript Y superscript little r is intelligible. Equally, I've got EK, E little k, energy input to a machine, etc., etc. Just to make it more intelligible as a teaching tool.
So I'll tell you where my line of thought, because I have one foot in the door in the system dynamic D memos and what you just said. So in the D memos, it recommends that you use, and Mike, you'll know about this. If it's a stock, we use the full actual word. We don't use a brief. So if it's capital stock, it's capital C, then all little letters, and then stock S, all little letters. If it's a parameter, we use all, or a constant parameter, we use all capitalized letters. And this goes to when you export it to a spreadsheet. If it's a flow and auxiliary, it's all little letters. So I kind of go halfway in between there. If it is a stock in my model, because I'm using small abbreviations like nominal capital, I'll use capital K subscript N, right? And that it donates. If I export that to a spreadsheet, I know that's a stock, right? Because they're capitalized letters. If it's a flow, I use all lowercase, like the employment ratio, E subscript R, right? And so I know that is a flow. Now with Minsky, you have the advantage of using real latex Greek letters, which is really cool. And so what I do is my internal rule, my best practice, and there is no rules out there, but my best practice is, instead of using all capitalized letters, because I'm using abbreviations, and I've got the Minsky, which gives me out my latex so I can put that right into a paper, I use a Greek letter, and I use that Greek letter for the entire function system in that. So for instance, lambda is for the rate, the employment rate. It's for the entire employment rate. So E, lambda is a function of E subscript R. So E subscript R goes into the function. The 4 parameters are lambda M, lambda X, lambda Y, lambda Z.
That's fair enough.
And then its output is lambda itself. And that was just the naming convention. I do get what you said about that, and you made that critique when you read the paper. So the small linear model, I changed all the subscript and superscripts to match where that's coming from, to try to make it a little more legible. The thing is no matter what abbreviations I'm using, if nobody really understands the totality, it all looks like gibberish. And that's the one thing where I like a system dynamicist. If what's his name, Mike, what's his name, Melchowski, what's his first name?
Len Melchinsky.
Now, he is a huge best practices guy, and I love him. I love watching his videos, and he's like, he'll go with that D memo where you use your full words. If it's a stock, it's, capital stock with the 2 letters capitalized. If it's a parameter, all capitalized letters. And if it's a flow or an auxiliary, so flow is actually something that accumulates into a stock or out of a stock. If anybody's listening, auxiliary behaves the same way. It's a flow, but it's actually not accumulating or deaccumulating in stock. He says use all lowercase letters. And that way, if you're presenting to stakeholders who know nothing about modeling, it doesn't matter if it's DSG modeling, system dynamic modeling, agent-based modeling, they don't give a fuck about that, right? They want to see kind of the causal structure in full words. And in that case, I could have gone down that route. But writing a paper with the equations with full words, the equations would be longer than the line of paper, and it looks so I have to reduce that into some sort of form. So I had to use my own best practices, and I could adjust that to anybody's preference. Like, I agree with your preference, Steve. It works fine for me, and either way it will be legible, but I'd never hit the mark. I don't think anyway, other than I have to describe what each term means anyways in the paper, right? And so the one thing I did at the end of the paper is I put a glossary of terms. So if you
Yeah.
really want to absorb, why I'm using these terms, you can look at that. So that's kind of was my thinking in all of that. Is unfortunately I have half a foot in your world, Steve, in like economic
Yeah,
modeling
and
and what
half on the
term, and half in system dynamics, where
yeah,
there's some
yeah.
best practices, and it is very hard to put them together and have
Mm,
both audiences accept them, and then have a third audience, the layman audience, accept
mm,
it too, right? So that's just an artistic preference I had to pick in a lot of ways of
mm,
how am I defining these terms, right? And maybe Mike,
yeah.
you've got something to say about that.
I guess I would say what I tell the students is once you get rolling on this stuff, you define your own style.
Mm,
And I will often tell the students, here is how I do it, here is my style. But a lot of times it's neither right or wrong, it's just how you do it.
yeah.
And when your models get bigger, you have to keep track of everything. Not just your audience needs to understand what you're doing, but you need to understand what you're doing. You put the thing away for a couple of weeks and you come back to it and you're like, what the heck was I doing here now? You're trying to
Mm,
remember. So for example, to give you, you can, first of all, you can start with file names. I'll have, Acme sector, then I'll have beta sector, and then I'll combine them into full model one. And the first thing you see when you open it up, this, my name, my date, the date it was created, my email address in case I'm sharing it. And then this full model one is a combination of Acme and beta sectors, and then the next one is full model two takes full model one and adds an expectation structure in this area. So that's how I do it. That's not right or wrong. That's how I do it. Because when I'm in version 41 and I go reopen version 29, I'm like, what the hell did I do in version 29 of this thing? As it's getting bigger and bigger. And similarly with variables, like, I don't know if you're familiar with the beer game where you have a retailer, wholesaler, distributor, and a factory. In that case, if you were building a model of that, each station has an inventory. Do you say inventory retailer, inventory wholesaler, inventory? And then when you want to see your equations alphabetically, all the inventories are together, all the backlogs are together. Or do you say retailer, inventory, wholesaler, inventory? And then when you sort your equations alphabetically, all the retailer equations are together, all the wholesaler. It's neither right or wrong. It's your preference. And yeah, you see with the capitals and smalls and all that stuff, people who come from programming like C++ and things, they have their conventions and they just sort of use them in system dynamics. I don't think it's right or wrong. It's just that as long as you can figure out what the hell you're doing and then explain it to somebody else, I think it's the bottom line. But you develop your own style as you go along, and then you just roll with it, and that's just that. And others can see it and they can copy you or not. It's their modeler's choice. One thing about my
I tried.
One last comment though before we move on. I want to say something positive for my dear engineering colleagues related to system dynamics. And that is, over the years, we've done or tried to do consulting engagements with corporations and the public sector. It's more a corporate thing. And what we found is those managers who have risen to usually the C-suite, you're dealing with, if you're trying to get a contract to do some strategic modeling in a corporation, you're not dealing with folks in the mailroom in their third week on the job. You're dealing with people who know the industry, know the company very well. They do it every day, all day. They're quite senior, right? If the managers who have risen to the C-suite or the upper echelons that come from finance and accounting, you might as well be talking to a fire hydrant when you're trying to explain. We can build you a model, and immediately their mind goes spreadsheet. They think model equals spreadsheet. If you say, no, we're going to model your corporation, turn it into a game, and you can fly your corporation like a pilot trains in a simulator. They have that deer in the headlights, right?
Mm.
If they have come to the C-suite through engineering, like a utility or an aerospace corporation, something like that, a Raytheon, a General Dynamics, whatever, and you say, yeah, you guys simulate chemical processes, we simulate, they go, oh yeah, okay. They get it like immediately. But man, the finance, accounting, marketing people, it is like pulling molars to get them to understand. And even if you showed them your model, like, well, this is what I mean. Oh my God, they'll validate your parking and walk you to the exit because they just don't get it. They don't see the value. They're not taught to think about it this way. But the engineers get it. So God bless the engineers.
And that shows what goes wrong when you let people who've been trained badly run capitalism. And fundamentally, people who've been trained badly are the economists, which is, I mean, the main thing Ty's doing here is a comparison with DSGE modeling. And there's been a very interesting discussion on Twitter where a whole lot of DSGE modelers are talking about the strengths and weaknesses of their specific models. But it's showing there's a post-Keynesian alternative. Okay, and they'll say, you guys you don't understand math. Well, sorry, mate, but fuck you. We understand it better than you do. And that's largely what Ty's model is showing here. I imagine a neoclassical being showing your model would be freaking out. Where's the equilibrium?
Yeah. And so that was the other aspect of, what I showed Mike there, I actually didn't have any specific parameter values to calibrate it into a steady state that's at zero. So it's a steady state error. I'm just showing how far away from zero it's a deviation from the steady state. So it's a deviation. It represents a steady state error and a deviation of where the system would be in equilibrium, essentially. But why I built that three equation is because that is how mainstream economics thinks. They think in the term of that linear model, right? And so I wanted that aspect to show, we can have three equations too for a dynamic complex, like that represents a nonlinear complex system, linearize it, and just show the deviations from a steady state. And then you can take that model, Mike, and you can do all sorts of calibration tests on it to your little heart, as you would call it, torture the data, take a bunch of empirical data and torture the fuck out of it and make your model do whatever you want, and then apply whatever insights you find on that into your larger model. But I wanted that to show that, we can think in those terms, but we're going to think in those terms and then apply that to a full nonlinear system. Because at the end of the day, if you constantly if your model presents a world where it always converges to equilibrium, no matter how many little frictions you put in that slows down that convergence, which is very uninteresting to me, the reality is, before you even get to that convergence, you're going to have instability. So it's not going to just converge to that smoothie. It's going to be like this down to equilibrium. And then when you actually apply that to a full structured nonlinear model, it's never going to reach that equilibrium, right? And so I want it to somehow tie conventional economic thinking, which right now is the new Keynesian three-equation model, with a post-Keynesian three-equation model that's driven not on maximizing utility, but is based on demand. So if you put more government spending in, right, it's looking at the macro economy from a demand perspective, instead of whatever their perspective is, really just maximizing utility until it converges to that maximum level, both for wages and leisure and profits. And the gap between potential output and realized output is closed, right? That is their exercise. Optimize the model to get to that. That is, and use that. That is the model they use to say, okay, now we're going to forecast 4 quarters into the future. Unfortunately, if we're approaching some sort of debt deflation crisis, that model's not going to pick it up. It's just not, robust enough to do it. It's not even about being right on the exact dollar amount. It's just qualitatively which way is the business cycle going to go in that crisis, right? And you know, what quarter is that going to happen? Their models, they just can't do that, right? And at the end of the day, when I say, well, you can do it, they'll say, well, it's too hard to optimize those types of models. That's the biggest, Mike, that's the biggest pushback I get from mainstream economists on system dynamics. Oh, so we can't optimize it. And I ask them, what do you mean optimize to what? They're like, to equilibrium. I then ask them, you know, at what point in the business cycle do we reach equilibrium? They're like, well, we never reach it. I'm like, then why are you building models to reach equilibrium? And they're like, so we can show students how to model in macroeconomics, right? And so it becomes about the model.
The chicken becomes the egg. Yeah.
Right.
So I would disagree. We can certainly optimize a system dynamics model, either do a policy optimization or optimization in the sense of curve fitting, you know, minimizing synthetic data, this distance between synthetic data and actual data. So that we can do that if you want. It's in the software. It's not a problem. The question becomes, is that a good use of your time to do that? Often we find that no, you don't learn anything new really from the model by doing that, but the client wants to see it. In their minds, they want to see real data, your data, their synthetic data, and oh, the black curve and the red curve look almost the same. Otherwise, they're not going to believe the model. So we have those sorts of algorithms, and we use them as necessary. Although Forrester always said it's probably not the best use of your time, but you know, go ahead if you want. Jim Thompson, a good friend of mine, he's recently passed away, unfortunately, and he basically gave us at WPI his models. Was an expert in healthcare dynamics. He did all his modeling for a large insurance company down in Hartford, Connecticut. And he modeled basically the U.S. healthcare system, but answering questions that the insurance company wanted. And he willed us all of his models before he passed away. And Jim used to always say, you know, when he builds models, he usually builds two versions of the same model. A model that starts in equilibrium and you shock it out. So in equilibrium, everything's a horizontal line, right? Mm-hmm. And you shock it out, and then anything that is not a horizontal line has to be the system's response to the shock, or how it's digesting or processing the shock. It's very easy to see what's happening then, as opposed to it's doing whatever, and then you shock it, and then how do you disentangle what it would have done anyway versus the shock? And so he called that a modeling for policy analysis. What if we raise, on January 1 at 1201, the marginal income tax rate goes from 0.2 to 0.25. You shock it out and you see as it ripples through the system, what happens. We also, by the way, do that when we're building a model. We'll put a piece in equilibrium and shock it with all sorts of test inputs to knock it out of equilibrium with the test inputs and see, what does it do? Is it doing anything silly, or does it make complete sense? And we do that before we hook it up to some other piece of structure. So equilibrium can be a very useful tool in system dynamics, and we use it all the time. It doesn't mean we believe the real system is ever in equilibrium or that all the insights are from that. But Jim's other way of building a model was then to have it fit to data, and he called that modeling for forecasting. So that, okay, it matches the whatever up to here. Now let's run it forward for 2 years and let's see what happens. And he said, clients like that. They kind of expect that. They want to see sort of forecasting. So he said, whether or not Jay did that, Forrester did that, this is what clients who want to pay us money want to see.
Yeah.
So sometimes you do stuff like that just because that's what the client wants, or you build a bigger model than you need to because that's what they want to see, a lot of detail here, because that's their department and they're paying you. So you sometimes do stuff for that reason.
Yeah, the only way to make money is actually to do that.
Yeah, but the fun thing for us is we can say, these are our alternatives to your models they're using at the Federal Reserve, and it's alternative modeling framework, which of course, includes factors they don't include. One of the reasons their models don't capture things like the global financial crisis is, according to their a prioris, credit plays no role in aggregate demand and income. So they leave credit and private debt out of the system. And then when the crisis is caused by that, they haven't got an effing clue what caused the crisis. So it's partially one thing where you could use this model is to show like an alternative to DSGE. But you could also say these are the factors we include that you don't, regardless of the modeling framework. And then what happens when this phenomena changes in our model versus yours and the real world.
Yeah, the traditional Forrester way of using system dynamics modeling is not to forecast the future in the sense of what's the unemployment rate going to be 3 quarters from now or something like that, but rather to say, how do we use it to redesign the system, let's say our corporate system that's behaving suboptimally. Maybe I'm not saying we're bankrupt. We're still in business, but we have issues. What are the issues? We have a smaller market share than we'd like. Our share price is too low. We're constantly hiring and letting people go. Our HR department's tearing their hair out. Supply chain management issue, whatever. So the question is, okay, once we model the system or the structure of your system and get the model to mimic your problem, what can we do to redesign things in ways that aren't just pie in the sky, but where, here's something concrete you can do that will make something better. And if it's unstable, it stabilizes it, maybe not perfectly, but it damps it a great deal. Something is growing very slowly. Now it's growing much more quickly, or, whatever you want. And that's off. So we were recently working with an insurance company, large insurance company, actually, international. And when we were pitching to them, well, here's the kinds of things we could do. Again, a lot of them were, it was funny. Model equals spreadsheet. No, but that's what they were thinking. Number 2, when I said, well, basically, you're going to tell us how your business works, and we'll capture that in the model. So it's your model, not my model, right? And you have a lot of great mental models. You've been doing it every day, all day for 20, 30 years. You know a lot. We can capture that, and the machine will mercilessly trace that through the implications of your knowledge of the business, and then we can go from there. How might we change things? The response was, so we're going to build the model, not you, but we're going to pay you. And I said, no, we're trying to make a bespoke model. But so then one of the guys said, so don't you people use any data? Data equals numbers to these people. It doesn't include written information or mental models.
Yeah.
And I said, no. We can use numerical data if you have it. We can fit the model to any time series you have or whatever. Then he starts freaking out, and he turns to whoever was next to him. You know how many person hours that's going to take me to scrub all the data and get it? And he starts like having hemorrhaging, thinking, now I need all of his data for 4,000 years. And it's like, no, I said, we can build without data. You don't have to chill, man. It's like, so this is what you encounter. This is in a corporate setting with C-suite executives who are presumably not idiots. They're smarter than the rest of us. That's why they're in charge, I guess.
No, let's not go that far.
But finally, one senior level executive, a nice lady, said, what I'm hearing is you could tell us what would happen if in Detroit auto sales fell by 2 million vehicles next year. That shock, you could tell what would happen to our auto insurance business. I said, yes. She goes, oh, that'd be very useful.
You finally got there.
What am I trying to tell you for the last hour here? So it's really a challenge. Most managers, public and private sector, do not care about the tool. They could care less. I have this cutting edge tool called Ravel. I have this cutting edge. They're like, yeah. Everybody who walks through my door has a cutting edge tool. Who cares? True. Nobody cares. Yeah. They're domain people. They got a friggin' domain problem, and they want it solved. And if you can solve it, they will pay you lots of money because it's a big pain point for them.
Yeah, fair enough.
And when you present to them, you usually get one bite at the apple. If what they're hearing, even if what they're hearing is totally wrong, if what they're hearing is you're not going to solve their problem, they're going to validate your parking and show you the door. Long
Hmm.
story short, I've had that happen a million times. And as I'm walking out, I'm going, like, they didn't hear me. They didn't get what I was saying, but maybe that's on me. I wasn't clear enough, or I didn't, craft my materials in a manner that would allow them to understand what the value of this sort of modeling, right? But it's you almost never deal with tools people like, oh, show me the details of your Runge-Kutta method. It's nobody like that. They go, I got a freaking supply chain or market share problem here. It's killing me. The board is going to kill me at our next meeting. Can you help me fix this? And if you say, yeah, they might say, give me the name of 2 companies with similar problems that you've helped, and I want to call them and find out what the story is. I've heard that one too. So that's chicken egg, right? If this is your first one, how do you get that reference to get going? But if they say, yeah, call this person and that person, say, yeah, this was great, blah, 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 you're golden. And now you can start making money, I think, using these tools.
Mm. The thing for us is to crack through the belief that neoclassicals have that they're the only game in town. And that's why
I say talk, trying to like convince the economics profession. It's trying to save humanity. Cool, but you're not going to make any money doing that. You make your money either at firm level, or I think there's a lot at the industry level, aiming your modeling acumen to say to the American Home Builders Association, hey, you got a thing with lumber pricing and interest rates and all sorts of stuff in this complex system. Maybe we can help you tell your lobbyists what they should be lobbying Congress or Parliament or whatever for, in terms of changes that would stabilize your business, so you're not opening mills and closing mills and building houses and laying guys off and whatever. What should you be doing? I think there's a lot of money to be made there, because they would pay a lot of money to know that in a unique way. But I think, convincing economists or some bank somewhere don't use DSGE, I'm not saying it's impossible. I think it's a tougher.
Well, the main thing is to tell students there's an alternative, and like
it's easy to actually tell BlackRock don't use DSG models. We've done it, Mike.
Well, all right. So that's kind of, so we're in the finance industry then. So that would be in harmony, I guess. What I'm trying to say is going to a BlackRock and saying we have these tools and we can answer these sorts of questions would be the place to go, rather than saying, hey, I'm going to hang out my macroeconomics shingle and don't use their macro modeling, come to me. I think as a general proposition, I just think that's hard.
Yeah, finance is the place to go, because people, this means money. Okay? And if you can show better predictive capability, then even if you're ideologically the opposite of the person you're talking to, they're more interested in their checkbook than they are in your ideology.
Well, if you use goat entrals and you can beat the competitors, they'll hire you. They don't care.
Yeah.
They just
want
about
the goat, but that's right.
I think that's the distinction between paradigm shifts in economics versus physics. So physics, you can design that. Oh, geez, I forget the name of the model, and basically starts with the Big Bang and creates a whole universe with galaxies. It's not our universe, but it simulates how a universe, and that's your paradigm shift, and that field will accept it. Whereas in economics, you literally have to change the balance sheet and profit level of a firm and have that feedback into academia later on. So the results actually have to be from the financial
sector.
Of
the theory.
And so that's would be my hope, Mike, is models that we BlackRock is finally convinced by Doug and I and a few other people that this is another avenue. It's not the only avenue. Like, they use tons of different models, whether it's VAR models, DSG models, they looking at all of it, right? So there's never going to be that one tool that this solves everything. But we are trying to push agent-based modeling has had some success in the finance field, and you're starting to see the mainstream they're talking about it, but they're still saying, well, it's too hard to optimize, and does it can't fit our type of micro foundations into that. So But as there's more success in the private sector, that's going to feed back into the academic, where it becomes just accepted knowledge. One of the constraints, and shall I say, informational delays in that process, is NDAs. So any new novel technique that's used in the finance, they're not going to share it. You can't share it for many years, right? Especially if they're getting alpha from it, and that means making money. They don't want their competitors to have it. In fact, BlackRock may buy us out for millions and millions of dollars, not use our technology just to make sure somebody else doesn't use it for the next 5 years.
Yeah.
That just might be the case. But eventually, once that lag subsides, people retire, somebody goes, maybe retires out of that high-paced finance, it goes back into academia with their PhD and says, I want to go teach the children. They're like, this is one of the methods we use. Right. And that's where the paradigm shift, because then that guy gets together with another professor and let's write a new version of the Mankiw macroeconomic or microeconomic textbook. Let's just take Mankiw's name out of it. Hopefully he's dead by then. And that becomes one of the models in the textbooks, one death at a time, Mike.
They're not enough. That's not good enough. You've got to kill the children who are there crying over the death of their lecturer, and they want to replace them with exactly the same theory.
Dave Cole, I think social media and modern technology might assist in that. Dave Colander, who of course Steve knew well, as I did, used to always say, he was a big Mr. Econ textbook, that there was a 15% rule, that you could not be more innovative than 15% of the standard in that sort of textbook, or nobody would publish it because they couldn't sell any of the books. They were too innovative, right? So again, it works against,
the whole thing just works against change. I mean, the one way in which they've got equilibrium right is you can't move them out of their bloody comfort zone.
Yeah, and some of it's human nature even. It's just that I can keep using all the notes and PowerPoint slides that I have and get the next version of the book that's slightly different. Yeah. Or there's a complete new way of doing it, and I got to learn everything. And I want to go bowling this weekend. I don't want to do all the work.
Laziness is an important input to economic theory.
Yeah.
So how is the predictive model going, Ty? The big one.
Well, I was actually just the big one. Okay, so hold on here. I was just making a steady state model for Mike here. So we could
I'm
get
thinking
on
about your predictive model for applied MMT.
No, I was taking the three-equation model, so I have it in steady state right now for you, Mike. And then I was going to introduce a shock for him to see. That's exactly what I was talking about. So Mike was describing that it's great to look at equilibrium, right? Because now you can study a phenomenon in isolation and then shock the economy. And I was just setting that up in the model. But as for our model, it's done. It's done. We're just trying to make money from it now, and somebody else can buy it, right?
Just on this issue of steady state error, to be clear, equilibrium is one of many possible steady states, right, where the system can get locked in. You can have two exponentially growing variables, right, and they're exponentially growing with constant rates, and the ratio of the two will be a horizontal line, but it's not, the variables themselves are not going to be horizontal lines. And, a chaotic attractor, I guess, is a steady state, right? So you can have all sorts of steady states, one of which is equilibrium. The way to think about it with what we do is that in a steady state equilibrium, all the stocks need to be at their targets, at their desired values simultaneously. Because if they're not, then corrective action should be motivated by at least one of the negative loops. And if it's in steady state error, it means the negative loop can't correct a problem. So something is missing from all of that. And in system dynamics, we have all sorts of fixes. Electrical engineers have fixes for steady, as we get into PID controllers and all that. So
don't get me going on PID controllers. I'll be bringing up that model next.
Kids, before I came on here today, we had a little.
Where's Tony?
We had
Tony,
a multiplier accelerator model that was oscillating, and then we put in a PID and it stabilized it right away. So anyway,
that was a couple of years ago. I wanted to formulate a paper that if we just got engineers to work at all the central banks around the world and all the treasury departments around the world, and they just designed a bunch of PID controllers for every function that we do, we could reach that euphoric level of perfect equilibrium and harmony. There'd be peace on earth. Everybody'd be smoking their dope and the world be a happy place. But that's not going to happen anytime
rules
soon.
versus discretion.
Wouldn't you like that, Tony? Tony, when you were in Canada, did you live in Saskatchewan? Because that's where all the dick Canadians live. Just to let you know. You there, Tony?
He's working up an insult. It's a difficult 3 o'clock in the morning in Brisbane to get right into the insult line.
Anyways, what about Larry Summers, guys?
Let's do Larry. Let's do Lounge Lizard Larry. Let's check him out.
Steve, Steve, what do you think about first? Yeah, we know he's a pervert now. That's old news from last week. What do you think? I have had discussions about him, and some people were like, "Well, he's one of yours. He's one of those Keynesians." And of course,
duck. Yeah, I know.
And to me, I'm like, well, maybe like the new Keynesian type, but not.
He's no way he's a Keynesian. I mean, they're all neoclassicals. They label the great joke is that one bunch label themselves new classicals. That's the ones that develop real business cycle models, and then the slightly less diluted mob that put in imperfect competition inside there call themselves new Keynesian, as though the whole thing is Keynes brings in frictions, and that's their big hot shot. Like I just the whole idea that the finance sector is a friction. It's a fucking lubricant. They only can handle stuff that slows down return to equilibrium, when in fact the real world is forces that push you away from equilibrium, and that's the thing. They just don't realize what a trap it is to think in terms of equilibrium, and it rules out the most interesting things in capitalism, which are evolutionary. And if once you're in equilibrium, you don't change. So they're leaving out the evolutionary forces that make capitalism a fascinating system. That's why I really appreciate what you've done, because it makes it possible to show students that there is a 3-equation model which generates non-equilibrium outcomes, which doesn't have to be backwards solved as their model does, and which generates more realistic behavior. So it's and like also the thing which has been very difficult for me with my post-Keynesian colleagues is most of them still, you'd know this, Mike, of course, they still think in discrete terms. They think in difference equation terms. They think modeling is, again, using a spreadsheet, and it's t and t plus 1 and t plus 2, as if things happen on a yearly basis. It's incredibly frustrating. So the fact that you're doing a differential equation modeling is showing how far you get with that is really a major contribution.
I'm just still working on that steady state model for Mike, but it seemed to have run into a bug with a Ravel. Go figure.
Oh dear, yeah, it happens
But
occasionally.
another interesting thing, if you want to think philosophical about this, and I know you guys aren't philosophy nuts, but I'll be my Dan Sanderson, right? I'll be Daniel Sanderson.
There you go. Okay.
You really think about it. If a system, and you're including time in your system, if your system, your variables are all in some steady state equilibrium, time ceases to exist. It's meaningless. Right? Because the change of time, each iteration, nothing else has changed in the system. And so by that nature and DSGE modeling, if there is no shock, there is no time. If there's equilibrium, there is no time. So essentially, from a philosophical perspective, their representation of an economic system, they are able to start time and stop it. If you really think about it, now, as with a path-dependent system dynamic model, you can't do that. You can kill the system. You can kill the system, and you can get it into a steady state. But that's all path-dependent, right? So essentially, it's like this. If we model the Earth and we destroy it through pollution or CO2, time ceases to exist here. here from our relative perspective, because we're not here anymore, right?
Mm.
And so that's the proper way to model time. But then Mike said about shocking a system from nothingness. I agree with Mike to look at a system in isolation to do that. But what scenario in the real world do we ever get to do that anyways? So does that, Paul, to see what that effect does in isolation, how can we ever see that in the real world in a nonlinear dynamic system? It's not going to happen. So I don't like that so much. I get what Mike's saying, but I don't think it's the right approach to understand a macroeconomic system, because whatever results you get out of it are in isolation. And if you try to apply that into a moving path dependent system, you're not going to see anything similar, in my opinion. You might see it maybe in a conveyor belt if you're modeling a conveyor belt and you shock it and look for a specific, but without knowing all the parameter values in the system, and all of the parameters themselves and the bounds of the system, I don't know. It's pretty useless. But anyways, I'm getting into a philosophical thing here. If you're in equilibrium, time doesn't matter because nothing's happening.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
Well, with dynamic equilibrium, if you have a stock, the Sturman's example in his textbook is the United States Senate. There's always 100 U.S. senators, but they're different people. So if you're plotting the number of U.S. senators, it's always 100 over time, but it is changing, right? There are different individuals in that stock. So it kind of just depends. I know it was a philosophical argument, but putting your Dan Sanderson's hat on.
Yeah. Hold on. He actually used to have a hat too. I don't have one.
Yeah.
That's right. We got to get Dan back on.
So just a couple. So Larry Summers, interesting guy. So he, one trivia question that non-economists might not know is he has two very famous uncles. His father's brother, his father's brother is Paul Samuelson, and his mother's brother is Kenneth Arrow, both Nobel Prize winners in economics, and they were both probably what's the best economist under the age of 40? What's that award? The not the Ely. Anyway, I forget the award. Anyway, I think all three of them won it. So, in fact, Lawrence Summers,
the Clark Award, I think.
John Bates Clark Award.
J.B. Clark,
right. Yeah, there you are. So, Larry Summers' parents are both economists at Penn. I don't know if they're retired by now, but because Paul Samuelson was so famous, his brother changed his name to Summers.
Oh shit! Okay, that's fine. Okay.
Yeah, and I saw him. I sat next to him at a restaurant in Cambridge a 3 years ago. But I did Larry Summers, and I also saw him at the Harvard Club. I was staying there on a consulting gig, and I was going to ask him. He was Treasury Secretary. He was president of Harvard, and he had been Treasury Secretary. And I had a dollar bill on me with his printed name on it, and I was going to ask him to sign it. But he came in, and it was summer, and he was struggling with all his luggage. He was sweating and all disheveled. And I thought, yeah, I don't think he wants me to come up and ask him to sign a dollar bill right now. So I backed off, and I let the guy alone.
I had a few, I'm just speaking at conferences in the States on occasions. I'd never met Summers personally, but I would talk to the staff who ran them and find that Summers had often spoken at a previous event. And they said he was a rude asshole. He treats the clerical staff really badly. And they used to say, don't get that fucker back again. So the arrogance that comes out of that is quite remarkable. And that's one reason you get a certain pleasure to see a character like that get a comeuppance, because all the reports I've got back, Krugman comes out as slightly socially awkward, but not an asshole. Summers comes across as an asshole. So to see him wearing the consequences of his behavior, yay! About bloody time.
I like
karma or something.
I like
karma.
I like the interview a couple of years ago. He does, well, he used to, not anymore. He used to do a weekly show on Bloomberg This Week in Economics or something,
Yeah.
and he was talking about how too many people have jobs right now. It's pushing up the wage price and pushing up prices, and that we do need a reduction in employment. And he was speaking about the U.S. and he was saying this from a very nice paradise island with palm trees behind him. And I'm thinking, you fucking cocksuckers. And now I'm thinking, was that the Epstein Island?
That's fair. There you go. Yeah. I mean, some of the stuff that there's just in general about this whole crazy world we're in right now. You look at some of the behavior of some of the the ruling class, Keir Starmer in particular, I think about this way. There's no rhyme or reason to his behavior that you can explain, except that maybe somebody's got his balls in a vice. And if he doesn't do what they want to do, they're going to squeeze the vice. That seems about the only explanation for some of the, particularly the behavior, the whole attitude to the Gaza genocide, the divide between the ruling class and the people these days is quite enormous. And you see them, how can they look at what's happening in Gaza and say it's a war? It's a fucking extermination. So the fact that they say it, you think, you're seeing the same, you're really watching the same or better video feeds than I'm watching. You're seeing 90% of the country being destroyed by this invasion. You're trying to tell me you're trying to kill a few thousand Hamas operatives. You must be bloody awful shots in that case, because you shot the whole damn country down to do it. And they come up with this stuff and you think, what the fuck is your motivation to have you behave that way? And ultimately, I think it's, you're in the Epstein book. So I normally don't give a shit about that sort of stuff, but I really would like to see the unexpurgated Epstein files to see just how many videos there are of these characters screwing younger girls and et cetera, et cetera. It's got to be there, and that's the only way I can explain the behavior that they display.
Well, yeah.
Sorry for making your channel
no,
demonetized.
Yeah, I was just we can't actually see any of those videos. That's illegal. But I am interested on I wonder how sanitized they're going to be now, because it seems like Trump pushed it off, and now he's like, oh yeah, I'm fine with it. It's like, okay,
just
so
a few redactions.
We're going to get some sanitized versions of this,
17,000 phrases with 2 words blacked
but
out.
We know, because of where Summers lies in the political landscape, Democrat, his name's all through it. Right? So question, old heretic, you can't really copyright math. So there's 2 fronts to your question. So he's asking, how do you copyright a model so that people you show it to don't say great idea and steal the idea without paying for it? Okay, so as for a real complex, nonlinear, dynamic model like our national model, I could show it to anybody. They are not going to remember all those equations. They are not going to remember the prior. So that part, now giving the file to that person's a different story.
Yeah.
Okay, so showing it's not a problem. As for making it proprietary, if it is built into a larger proprietary system, there's some legalities there. But so when working in the finance field where this happens, when I pass that off, I'm going to sign an NDA, meaning I won't be able to talk about it to a degree, or won't be able to show any of the results from it anymore. And so it's an NDA that stops me, right? So then I submit to a legal obligation at that point where civilly I could be sued. Now, I could show it to somebody else right now, like Steve, and I can sign the NDA. He doesn't have any requirement. He could talk about it till the hills comes home. And if he did get taken to court, I didn't sign any NDA. I'm not under that. So that's the aspect of that. So the goal, and when you develop something like Doug and I have developed, we don't share it. Right. And we don't share it with it. We are the only ones that. So now we have value in ourselves and our work. When we go to sell it to some place, some hypothetical place, BlackRock, Goldman Sachs, we then sign an NDA that keeps the value. Now we can't talk about it anymore. But if we were to sit around and send it to 100 other people, then we risk the value of being able to sell it to somebody else, because somebody else could have it. So it's not about copyrighting the equations. Now, if they take that model and integrate it into some larger proprietary trading system, there could be some copyright things there that I wouldn't be involved in, right? I'd just be involved in the NDA. As for writing a paper and stuff, you're essentially giving it to the world. What you're looking for there is credit. So if I do an academic paper, I'm going to get a DOI, right? Which is basically it means that I'm the public. It's my signature that I publish that paper. Anybody brings it up, quotes the paper, I cite, I get my credit for it in history. Big whip-de-do. If I put it at the end of the book, of course, I got my own ISBN numbers for hardcovers, soft covers, right? And I'll trademark my book title and stuff like that. I'll put it in the copyright. You can cite this book with a credit. And so that's how you cover the work on the academic front. But if you're in the academic realm, you're not making any money. Like, look at Steve and Mike.
They're flood victims.
Yeah.
Right. So, well, Mike actually has a pretty big freaking. I actually think he's got some cash that he's not talking about, but we won't get into that.
It comes from the system dynamics, not from the economics.
Yeah, that'd be right. Yeah.
So that's kind of how I approach it. But as for copywriting math, I don't think you can actually do that. I'm pretty sure you can't copyright an equation. I might be wrong, but I don't think that's actually legally possible.
No, it ain't. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's how you protect yourself, though, and it depends on what situation it is. From the financial private sector, I'm signing NDAs, and I'm not sharing my work with anybody before I sign that NDA, so I can make my cash and go home. If I'm in the academic realm, I try to just keep my work private until a journal, or I submit it to a repository to get my DOI number, or if I'm writing a book, I keep that private until I get my ISB number assigned to it, and I trademark my book cover. And then I can, if anybody replicates what I've written, then I have a legal path forward. But as for math and numbers itself, I don't think it's possible to copyright numbers and math symbols. Hope that answers your question. Any other questions, put them in the chat too before we go. Oh, it's been 2 hours already.
It's 2 hours. I've already got there. I was about to tell you, you've gone over the time limit.
Engineer brain.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Which part which part was working at that stage? Not the.
This potential energy calculator.
I think more management bullshit sense. So yeah, that's probably where you're
It's
working.
like for stupid people. I like that.
That's right. Yeah.
Now, Mike, you weren't here, but anyway, so I got Marie to buy me a bunch of corny shirts like that. So each week I'm going to wear a different one. I really thought this would get to Tony this week. So this was for Tony.
Well, you for a while there, you were dressing up in a suit every week.
Yeah,
so it made me uncomfortable just looking at you.
You wear what we call a Harewood dinner jacket, which is cool. I like it.
He's a lumberjack. He's a lumberjack, and he's okay.
Yeah, so that's basically
in Wisconsin. We wear flannel.
Yeah, that's a very and most of Canada. That's we call it. There's a place in my birth town in a little neighborhood called Harewood, and anyways, everybody had their flannel jackets on. It's a bush town in a lot of ways, and we'd call it their Harewood dinner jacket. You go out to a restaurant wearing that. It's just fine. You fit right in. In fact, if you wore a suit or anything, you'd be
I got to tell you, this is how I grew up, and I don't know any better. This is how I roll, baby. I got work boots on and my flannels.
You're a disappointment to the academic world, mate, and so was I. There you go.
That's the way you want it.
Yeah.
You're not interesting if you're not disappointing.
That's true. We'd be a great disappointment to the economics profession.
Is you can do this sort of thing. Nobody cares.
Yeah, you're at that. So where's the campus, the WPI campus, in relation to the Boston itself? Is it in Boston or
about 40 miles out? Isn't it?
40 miles directly west.
Oh, so you are in the sticks. That's out in the sticks, kind of.
Mass, that's right.
Yeah. Okay, it makes sense.
In my yard, I have bear and deer, and also.
I was actually trying to joke about that. You've actually got bear in your. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, literally.
Wow. Okay. I'll be careful when I go there for a barbecue. I don't want to be on the
Yeah,
spittle.
you do
so
have to
speak.
be. They're not in the regular day. They're not there, but they then if you have like a chicken coop or something, they or bird feeders. They tear the hell out of them. They eat everything.
Fair enough.
Yep.
Not
All
a
right.
problem in Amsterdam. All right, guys, great to chat again. So, Ty, going to take us out?
We're going to take it. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave comments under the video. Tony, leave your comments here. They're always my favorite. Tell me what you think about engineers. Are they dicks or are they not dicks? Are they important? Engineers like Tony are not important. He once lived in Regina, cheered for the wrong football team,
There you go.
and is
That's
a
okay.
dick. That's how I'm leaving the show. Anyways, we'll be back next week. See you later. Bye-bye.
See you guys.
You are now relearning economics.